So Rick Beato made a video about how metal is supposedly dying. I'm not quite sure I agree with that, but I haven't watched it yet. So let's check it out, see what he has to say, and who knows, maybe by the end I'll end up on his side. For those who don't know me, I'm Eyal Levi, CEO of URM Academy. I've been a producer and a guitarist in my band Doth since 1999 and have been playing way longer than that. Long enough to have heard that metal is dead several times over. Oh, and just a quick FYI, if you're watching this in 2025, this is going to be my last video of the year, so Happy New Year. If you're watching this in 2026 or beyond, Happy New Year to you too. Let's get into it.
Where have all the metalheads gone? Over the last 15 years, there has been a noticeable decline in metal listeners. So I'm going to give you the top bands of the last 15 years that are contemporary bands. We'll start with Bring Me the Horizon. Has 13.6 million. Ghost, 9.8, Pierce the Veil, 9.7, Volume Verse, 8.7. There's only one band that has over 10 million monthly listeners, which is Bring Me the Horizon at 13.6. Now let's do a comparison of heritage bands, older bands, if you will. And we're going to do them by their current monthly listeners. Number one is Linkin Park with 53.7 million monthly listeners. Metallica 3.4, System of a Down 3.8, The Biscuit 21.9, Disturbed 17.5, Black Sabbath 17.3, Deftones 17.1, Slipknot 15.2, Ozzy 14.5, Osiris 13.6, Rammstein 13.3, Skillet 12.1, Blessthefall 11.3, Alice James 7.6.
Okay, so I'm going to stop him right there. So what that tells me is a few things. First of all, of course, legacy acts are going to have higher numbers overall than newer acts, because those legacy acts, especially the ones that are still going, like Metallica and Linkin Park, who are still putting out music, still touring all the time, they're still relevant. They're just as relevant to metal fans as the newer bands are, and they've had much more time in the market, many more albums, many more hits. Of course, they have more listeners. I mean, that just makes sense that if a band has been big for 40 years or 30 years, they're going to have a bigger fan base than a band that's been big for 10 years. I'm not really quite sure that that argument really stands up, that there's less people listening to metal nowadays. If anything, what that tells me is that metal actually never dies. You know, I've been hearing my whole life that metal is dying, but if anything, if the old bands are still alive and doing well, and the newer bands are also doing well and climbing, then that tells me that metal is thriving.
If you go back to the first batch of bands that are contemporary bands that I talked about at the beginning of the video, they're bands like Bring Me the Horizon, Ghost, Pierce the Veil, Falling in Reverse, Bad Omens, Five Finger Death Punch, Sleep Token. Those bands are not nearly as big as Metallica or Megadeth or Anthrax or Slayer, or even bands like System of a Down or Slipknot.
That's the whole record industry, though. The whole record industry has shifted to where metal bands, rock bands, they just don't get as big as they used to. However, I really think that if you're looking at this through the lens of mainstream success, you're looking at it incorrectly. So metal has a cyclical nature, kind of like Terry Dates said, where sometimes it's more popular, lasts for a little while, then it goes underground, then it comes back, goes back underground. But if anything, I'll tell you about a few things that have happened recently, which are pretty impressive. I mean, did anybody hear about Amon Amarth and Cannibal Corpse doing a small arena tour in the United States? In the 90s, I couldn't imagine that type of music playing arena level in the United States. Or how about Opeth headlining Red Rocks Amphitheater? That's a place where mainstream acts play. And then Opeth headlined it? That's crazy. I would have never imagined something like that happening either. My point being that he's looking at it more through a mainstream pop culture lens, where I'm looking at it more through an ecosystem health lens. I'm looking at it in terms of gear sales, a community, and in terms of the types of shows that these bands can play, as well as the longevity of these bands. So, for instance, if you go to the NAMM convention, which I'm sure if you're musicians, you've heard of it, the biggest convention in the US for musicians, well, not musicians, but music gear companies, meaning guitars, amps, interfaces, plugins, trombones, sheet paper, like anything that involves tools for people who make music, work on music, it's there. All the companies go there. Tons of artists go there, all, ranging from the most famous to people who are still trying to get their feet in the door. And if you walk around, you'll notice something very interesting. I'd say like 50% of the floor space is dedicated to metal. You know, you walk by an Ibanez booth and it's mostly metal guitars. If you walk by several other booths, you'll see that metal has a disproportionate amount of space taken up. Now, why is that? Getting a NAMM booth is a pretty expensive proposition. I know this because URM got a NAMM booth one year, and we didn't have a big one, and it was tens of thousands of dollars. These bigger booths are in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, for these companies, and they're devoting a lot of space to metal. Why is that? Well, because the metal community is different than your pop community. The metal community have a lot of creators in the community. A lot of it is music by musicians for musicians. It just happens to be that a lot of people who listen to metal also make metal. And so a lot of where you see the health of metal is in gear sales, in guitar sales. That's just where it exists. So if you're comparing it through mainstream pop culture lens where you're looking at total streams or even back in the day total record sales, obviously it's going to look tiny. You have to look at other things like the health of tours or gear sales to really see how it's doing in totality.
To put it in perspective, Bring Me the Horizon, which is pretty much the biggest of these kind of post-metal or metalcore bands, with their 13.9 million monthly listeners on Spotify, Can You Feel My Heart has 796 million plays, or 800 million plays. But there's really very few, if any, that are even close to that. They just don't connect with kids in that age bracket, I don't think, like they did. It's a far smaller group. I think one of the reasons is that kids don't play instruments like they did. I really believe that. It's not that they don't like heavy music, it's that their connection to heavy music, a lot of people, was through playing. I know mine was, maybe because of social media and kids that just don't get into music like they did.
I beg to differ. I mean, if you look at gear sales, guitar sales, if you look at companies like Fender, I realize that Fender isn't known as a metal company, but it's a good example to use. Or you look at Sweetwater, which is one of the biggest gear retailers. These are companies who have passed 1 billion in annual revenue. That's crazy. And this has only happened recently. People are buying more instruments and are playing more music. And all you have to do, if you want to find out whether or not metal kids are playing music, is get on TikTok, because that's where a lot of young people are, or get on Instagram and just scroll, type in guitar, metal guitar, and scroll, and you will see endless amounts of it. You can keep doing that for a full year and not see the same person twice, except you probably will if the algorithm is pushing somebody. But if gear sales and social media influence is any indicator, then kids are playing music a lot. And the fact that URM still exists after 10 years and we keep on having new people coming in and the young people keep regenerating, that tells me that young people are into it. So I don't know if I agree with him. If anything, also, kids these days are way more serious about their instruments than when I was coming up in the 90s. When I was coming up, I knew a few other people who played guitar, but I was the only person I knew who was serious about it. In my entire circle, nobody else was fucking serious about it. Now I know some younger people through Riff Hard and URM, and they are way more serious than even I was at that point in time, and their entire bands were more serious than I was or my bands were, or anyone that I encountered, even at Berkeley at that point in time. Like, I just don't think he's right about this.
A lot of the young kids like to work out, do things like that. They watch sports, but they're into fitness and doing things like that. They're not into going to metal shows. I've got kids that are in that age range.
And I've got friends that have kids in that age range too. This is Mike. Mike has a couple teenagers.
Yeah, it's pretty wild because I find, if you're 15, and you just traded in Baby Shark for a little Boozy. There's not much edgy stuff happening with musicians, whether it's because they don't play music at home. And if they do play music at home, my God, they're in their bedroom, next to their parents' bedroom, fiddling around on a Line 6 Helix with their headphones on. They don't leave school, raging from having a hard day at school, coming out being like, you know what, I'm gonna get with my boys and we're gonna just, crush some Pepsi cans on our hand and make some drop C music and have a vibe. I mean, I think what we're missing right now is like a lifestyle, a vibe. Like that's what Metallica had.
Okay, so that's society as a whole. There are a lot of studies that show that younger people are socializing less. And so I guess in music that would translate as less people are getting together with other people to play music. They are in their bedrooms playing with headphones on in front of a computer. That is absolutely the truth. But that's true for every segment of modern society. Like, that is just a common modern disease, is that we're attached to our screens and socialize less. Ever since 2020, that's just accelerated the process. But that is definitely not something that's specific to metal. That's actually just specific to people in this time period dealing with the technology that exists now.
1999 Woodstock, the performance by Korn. And if you look at this, these are all teenagers. Look at, they're going crazy, moshing there. And the one thing that you don't see are phones.
Or parents.
Or parents.
You know, we went to things like Woodstocks when we were 13, not just
That's right.
15. It was a good time. And that's when you're at the age where you take chances and you really believe in things. And that's how society's built.
So what kind of music are they listening to, Mike?
I mean, I would say Young Boy is up there. NBA Young Boy, and then, you know, Lil Boozy just dropped a couple tracks. I mean, which are good. I mean, I'm not against it. It's just, you know, where's the heavy guitars? Where's the feeling of rock and heavy music spoke to people that were outsiders and people that needed somewhere to go, and it was great. I mean, it was a good time, and I hope it comes back.
Love to know your thoughts. Hit subscribe, leave a comment. Thanks for watching.
So, first of all, rap has always been big with teenagers, at least as long as I've been alive. So, you know, him saying that kids are listening to rap instead of metal, I mean, that's kind of always been true. So Mike brought up an interesting point, which is that there's nothing edgy happening anymore, and that metal used to be music for outcasts. And that's what I remember too. The people I knew who were into metal when I was growing up were the type of kids who would set their school on fire, and that actually happened. Someone I was in a band with tried to set their school on fire. They were the people who went to the schools for the violent kids. If you went to a metal show, like, I can't tell you how many times I would go to a show where half the crowd were neo-Nazis and you had to watch your fucking back. It was a much more dangerous scene. Some of that is missing, and frankly, that's not such a bad thing. If you don't need to worry about getting jumped by 50 neo-Nazis nowadays, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. But here's the other thing that I think is really, really relevant, is that metal used to be for outcasts, but a lot of those outcasts grew up and got jobs, and now you have metalheads in all walks of society. Like, you see them everywhere, and that's the reason for why I think it seems like the danger's gone or the metalheads are gone, but it's not that. It's they've kind of infiltrated all throughout. And there are some places where you can see them congregating the most. Like, for instance, in the video game music industry, there are entire departments for gigantic video game companies that are basically run by metalheads. It's prevalent there. It's crazy how many metalheads are in the video game music industry. A perfect example is Mick Gordon and how famous he got with Doom. I mean, that set a whole chain reaction of people wanting to do that. But that was only allowed to happen because people were already appreciating metal within those departments. Or if you look at the military, look at MMA, there's a huge metal culture in both of those. Metal is everywhere. It's no longer just for the kids that burn down schools. There's another argument I hear constantly, which is the no new Metallica's fallacy. You know, I'm sure you've heard it, that you don't hear classics being written. Why aren't songs good anymore? However, I remember hearing that same shit in the 90s. Like, I remember going to a recording studio in 1994 when I was like 14 years old, and the engineer was in his mid-30s. And I remember him saying that the bands of that time, like Metallica, Guns N' Roses, they were like the big bands of that era in heavy music, Pantera or whatever. They were just doing what the Rolling Stones were doing. He's heard it all before. The Rolling Stones are better. Now, sorry, I'm not a fan of the Rolling Stones. Never was. But for him to say that they're just doing what the Stones are doing, that seemed like he wasn't even giving this new music a chance. And nowadays, when I see people saying that same thing about the newer bands, it sounds exactly like that dude I knew who wouldn't give a chance to, you know, the Metallicas of the day. The reason that there's no new Metallicas, idea is a fallacy is because not enough time has elapsed to know if something's going to be a classic. You can't decide something's going to be a classic right when it's written. Time has to go by at least a decade or more before you know if something's a classic. So, now Slipknot has some classic songs. Anybody care to remember what it was like when Slipknot came out? Like how negative the reactions were towards their music? It was very, very similar to everybody now saying that metal sucks. It was only good back in the day. Where did the riff go? Like, why can't people write songs anymore? People were saying that same shit about bands like Slipknot. And if you rewind back in time 10 years earlier, they're saying the same shit about Pantera, about Metallica. People always say that. I think it's age related. So when you hear that nowadays, that says less about the music being written and more about the person saying it. It tells me that the person saying it is just not giving new music a proper chance. So to sum this up, in my opinion, metal is definitely not dead and it's not going anywhere. Just because it's not on the Billboard 100 doesn't mean it's not dead, because it's integrated into the fabric of entertainment and life in a way that's much deeper than ever before. And let me remind you, companies like Neural DSP, Fishman, Peavey, Mesa Boogie, and the list goes on, they would not even exist if it weren't for metal. Metal has created an entire industry and an entire economy, and it's worldwide, and it's a safe bet that if you're into it now and you do well with it, you can still be around in 10, 20, 30 years. It shows no sign of letting up. Don't be discouraged if it used to be more mainstream and now it's less mainstream. It always gets more popular, less popular, more popular, less popular. Regardless of that, the underground keeps going, the fans keep going, and I'm sure once you're a metal fan, you're always a metal fan. All right, have a happy new year, everyone. See you next time.